Hello and welcome back to Oasys Top Tips. Did you know that Oasys PRIMER has built-in tools to help you measure distances in model and screen space? Today I'm going to be showing you how to use the measure tool within PRIMER. There are three easy ways to access the measuring tool. The first one is to go to the Tools control pane and click on Measure, and you'll see the measure pane appear on the bottom right. Similarly, you can go to the Tools options at the top, click on it, and you'll find Measure in the drop-down list. I'll close this so I can show my last way. And the last way is using a shortcut. If you press the M button on your keyboard, the measure pane will appear. This is the way I tend to use it. When the measure pane opens up, you'll notice that the first option is highlighted as node to node. And this is convenient because this is what I tend to find I use most often, and you probably will as well. As the name suggests, you select one node, so I'll just click anywhere on the screen on the model, and you can see the node is highlighted. I'll just pan around so you can see that. Then I'll select another node, and a line will be traced between those nodes with a number written. That is the length of the vector. We can also see that displayed in the control pane, so 912 millimeters in this case. Then we get the vector here, and we get the coordinates of both of the nodes selected. Node 1 is the top and node 2 is the bottom. If we wanted to change one of the nodes, then we can click on the arrow on the right, pick, and then we can pick a node elsewhere in the model. And we see that the vector has updated, but note that the original node position is still there, just in case you would like to go back to it. Here we see the length is now 1109 millimeters. If you wanted to make it a unit vector, then you can click on the unit vector button, and it doesn't update immediately, but if you click refresh, then that will force it to update. There's other useful information here, like angle between the lines and the global coordinate system, and also the projected distance onto a coordinate plane. Now you'll notice that two of these boxes are white, and they're actually text input fields. So if I was to change one of the values here, say from 1109 to 1000, you'll notice that the line has shrunk, and actually what's happened is one of the nodes has moved. If I press the Y button just to display the mesh and zoom in, the node has actually moved. If I click on the undo move button, we'll see that it reverts back to its original position. Now, a word of caution here is you've got to be very careful when tampering with these fields, because the only way you can revert changes is with the undo move button. It doesn't appear in the undo stack. Similarly, you can change just the X, Y, and Z coordinates of a particular vector. So say I wanted the X distance to be 0. I could do that, press enter, and you'll see updates. Now it's quite clear that the mesh has been distorted. Again, I'm just going to undo that. You can see it looks a bit strange having the mesh changed. So this can be very useful, but I would use it with caution. Let's undo that move. Great. Let's have a look at the other options we have available to us then. I'll turn off the mesh just so it's a bit clearer by pressing the Y key on my keyboard. Okay, so if I click on the first option, we have point to point. This is actually measuring in screen space, and it doesn't update when you scale the view, so be careful when you use this. But for example, in this view, I have the ZY plane facing me, and I can click anywhere in the screen space, so it doesn't have to be on the model. So I'll just click here and here, and we get the distance between those 2 points we've now selected. So that's 2.6, 2.7 meters there. Say I was trying to measure maybe the width of a motorway lane, for example. That feels about right. I'll click again and just measure here, but note that this is stuck in screen space, so as soon as I scale the model, so using my scroll wheel in and out, the distance doesn't update. If I click refresh, that doesn't change it either. So it's only really relevant when the line was defined. Of course, if I didn't change the scaling and I just rotated the model, then it still retains its meaning, but note that it's only in the plane that's being shown. So it can be useful, but you've just got to be careful how you're interpreting it. Next we have point angle. Now point angle is useful if you want to just measure, again, the angle on the model in screen space. The first point you click is the apex of the angle, and the second 2 points define the shape. So here we can see the angle there. Now scaling has less of an importance here because the angle is fixed, but if you start rotating the model, then you're now measuring an angle from a different projection and different plane. So just a caution there. Again, I could measure the angle here, so we expect this to be a right angle approximately. So 1, 2, 3, and that's about 90 degrees. Great. Then we've got node angle. So you can do something similar with nodes, but this time it's fixed to a specific space in the model. So if we were wanting to measure, say, the top of the windshield at the back, down to the bottom, and across here. Let's go here, because remember the first node we select is the middle. And that's about 93.6 degrees. So that's about what we'd expect, approximately a right angle there. Okay, next we have nodal chords, and in this case it's just giving us the coordinates of any of the nodes we select, so we can just click around and inspect the nodes. There are other ways to check what the nodal coordinates are, for example going into the node keywords, but I find this is quite a useful way of doing so, and it gives you the distance of that node to the origin. Now the next option is curve lengths. This is if you had, say, a geometry curve in your model and you wanted to find the length of it. Now I don't have any in this model, and I don't think you'll have any in your models generally. I don't find this something I use very often, but the option is there if you need it. Then node to part. So it might be easier if at this point I start blanking some parts. Now just a note, here we have the control planes that we have open. So here we've got the measure tool as we opened it earlier. The part tree and the model are always open for ease of use. And if you want to go to the blanking options as you get when you first open the model, then you can select the model pane or the part tree pane. Those two gives you the options at the top as you would find when you open the model. So we can blank. So I'm just going to blank maybe the roof, these two windshields, and how about a wheel? And then if I click the R button on my keyboard, that actually reverses my blankings. So now only the things I blanked are visible. Looks a bit strange, but this will be useful for displaying the rest of the options we have. So here we have options of measuring a node to a part, so the distance of a node to a part. So if I select a node, first of all, we'll see it's appearing up here, and then we'll pick one of these parts. How about the front windshield? Okay, so what it's doing there is it's measuring the shortest distance from the node to the part I've selected. That can be very useful because sometimes it's not immediately obvious what that would be. Let's do it again the other way around. So I've selected a node here and a part at the back. And here we see it's about 1.5 meters. Again, sometimes it can be hard to read the numbers on the lines, but it is always appearing down in the control plane as well. Similarly, we have these arrows which you can change. So say we selected the wrong part accidentally, we wanted to select the wheel part, that will be updated. Okay, next we have part to part. As the name suggests, it just is a quick way of measuring between parts. So I select the front windshield and the back windshield, and here it's about 1.5 meters again, or 1400 mil between those two parts. You can select another part, and do the same thing. And again, it's just showing you the shortest distance. So you don't have to actually find which node that is. You can just click the two parts and it will show you the shortest distance. Then you might want to trace a curve with selecting nodes and measure the total distance of that. So this is the sort of free-form clicking. So I can just click around, and as I click, notice the node list is growing and the distance is also increasing. So now we're about 3 meters there. That could be useful maybe if I wanted to, first if I make a mistake, I can reject last and click again. If I click done, then that finishes that, and I can click on the option again and do it again. So I might want to trace the perimeter approximately of this part, just out of interest, and see what it gets me to. Doing this quite crudely here. Okay, so that's about 5.2 meters. So maybe that's useful for something if I'm just wanting to measure quickly and crudely. Then I've got the node curve option of selecting multiple nodes. Great. Then we have the distance plot. Now this can be really useful if you have two parts which would be quite close together, but you want a certain distance between them and you just want to make sure that that's the case. You could have had a model run where you've, for example, run a car into a wall and then you take the geometry out of that model and you're interested in how the parts are deformed and if any of them are contacting one another. That's the sort of situations you might want to use this tool in. First of all, you want to pick a part to measure from. So let's measure from this windshield mid layer at the front. Click apply, we'll just select one. You could obviously select multiple if you needed to. And then measure two, select that one. Now note, if you leave the measure to option blank, then it just measures to all the rest of the parts in the model. Apply there. You'll notice a blue line has formed. That is a vector, which is going to be measuring in. You can see the vector in the options here. So here we're just pointing down in the Z direction. I'm going to change that to 1, 0, 0, just so it goes in the X direction, because that's makes more sense for what I'm measuring here. There are other ways of changing this. You can select it normal to a shell, or you could change the direction of the node. So see, I'm reversing it there, and you can select it by using 3 nodes or a vector between 2 selected nodes. So I'm just going to calculate quickly. Okay, so that's finished calculating, and now we have the vector distance plot showing. So this part on the left was the one that we clicked measure from, and we're measuring to the part on the right. So what's actually happening here is we're getting the projected distance from the part on the left to the right in the X direction, because that's the vector we defined. You'll also notice here we have some options here, so a min and a max. This is for the banding of the vector distance. So we can see that the shortest distance between these two parts is 1,480 millimeters here, and the furthest away is 2,886. So we could tweak those if we'd like. We can also change the order, so reverse the colors and reset that if we've tweaked these values here. Now what's actually happening here is we have some blobs that are being overlaid. These are graphical things that can be placed on top of a model within Primer and can be used to display additional information. So they're just colored in nodes essentially in space. And we can tweak the size of the blob sizes here. So if we wanted to make them say maybe number 5, see they'll shrink a bit. So that could be good if lots of our nodes are quite close together and so we want them to be a bit more visible. Another thing we might notice is that this back windshield isn't completely colored in. Only some of this has the vector distance displayed on it. And the reason for that is because what we're actually doing is we're projecting the rear windshield onto the front windshield. And the rear windshield is actually slightly smaller in its X projection. So if I actually look at this, I press the 2 button on my keyboard just to make the ZY plane visible. And you can see that now we have the outline with my cursor over on the rear windshield, and it's going perfectly around the blobs that have been displayed. And so we have the projected distance for those parts, but obviously for the elements which are outside that range on the front windshield, they can't project onto the rear windshield because there's no point which they would meet them, so they're just not colored in. Okay, so that vector distance tool is can be very useful when we're measuring the distance between two parts or multiple parts within a model. I'm just going to close that down and show you the last option, which is node to plane. So the node to plane option is pretty simple. You select 3 nodes, which defines a plane. So 1, 2, 3, that's my plane here. And then I select one more node, and that gives me the shortest distance to the projected plane. So we have the line which is normal to the plane here. This is about 1 meter long. And we have a dashed line just indicating that it actually is an extension of the plane. Let's do that one last time. Here with the rear windshield, 3 clicks, that's our plane. And then one on the front. Again, if we move around, we can see that the extension of the plane is shown and the projected distance here. So again, this is a good example of how it can be hard to see. That might be misread as 135 mil, but if we look here, it's actually 1135. We have the options to change again, so I could tweak, I could pick another node. It updates our projected plane, and and everything updates accordingly. So I hope that's been very useful, and a quick run through of the measure tool within Primer. As I said before, the option I use the most is node to node, and that's the default. You've got the M button, which is a shortcut to access it. And the measure tool is particularly useful when checking stuff within a model, just making sure things are actually where you intend for them to be. So thanks for listening, and look out for the next top tip videos.